What if I told you that there is an advertising channel where people actually enjoy hearing ads? Yeah, I'm serious. I'm Mike Inishев, and today we are exposing the untapped power of podcast advertising. In this video, you will discover why podcast ads outperform traditional commercials, how KFC, Amazon, and Puma dominate podcast marketing, how Spotify became the #1 podcast platform, and why YouTube is stealing its podcast crown right now. Stay tuned, and by the end of this video, you will learn 3 game-changing podcast ad strategies that could transform your marketing. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and let's get smarter together. The podcast industry has exploded in recent years, becoming one of the most lucrative advertising frontiers. More than 115 million people in the US are listening to podcasts on a weekly basis. This is about 33% of the US population, a third of the country. You can only imagine the number of a global scale, as podcasting is really available everywhere. There are over 3.6 million podcasts out there covering every topic, interest, and passion under the sun, meaning there is a relevant podcast audience for every kind of business to reach through podcast ads. So it's becoming an increasingly popular way for companies to reach customers. But why do companies choose podcast advertising among all other options? Well, the first reason is high engagement. It's not a secret that podcasts are the most intimate medium, reaching the most engaged audience. Listeners often develop strong trust relationships with hosts, making ads read by them more persuasive. Another reason is ad retention. Studies show that listeners remember podcast ads better than traditional radio or TV commercials. The reason number 3, niche targeting. Podcasts cater to specific demographics, allowing brands to reach highly relevant audiences. As a result, companies are pouring lots of money into podcast advertising, with revenue expected to surpass $4 billion in 2025. Okay, podcast advertising works, but how do you actually get started? For brands, there are 3 ways to start podcast advertising. The first one is to launch a podcast by yourself. The second one is to use sponsored host read ads in the existing shows. And the third one is to place pre-recorded ads during podcast episodes. For example, Puma went the first way and launched the Go Wild podcast to connect with younger audiences, featuring interviews with athletes like Usain Bolt, which boosted brand affinity. Many brands go another way and leverage podcasts through sponsorships. Unlike traditional commercials, host read ads feel organic, leading to better listener trust and actions like purchases. For instance, BetterHelp, the online therapy platform, strategically partners with popular podcasts, leveraging host read ads to normalize mental health care, resulting in high ad recall and mental health service signups. Another standout example is KFC Australia's podcast campaign, which revived interest in its hot and spicy chicken. Instead of running generic ads, KFC collaborated with top-tier Australian comedy podcast Tony and Ryan and We Mean Well, weaving the product into humorous, engaging audio storytelling. This campaign delivered over 65% uplift in brand favorability among podcast listeners and gained more than 3 million total impressions, with over 1 million unique reach. Some big companies not just sponsor podcasts, they are buying it out, like Spotify. In 2020, Spotify made headlines by securing an exclusive licensing deal with the Joe Rogan Experience podcast for a reported $200 million. By making JRE a Spotify exclusive, initially the platform drove millions of new subscribers, increasing its ad inventory. Rogan's massive audience made Spotify a dominant force in podcast advertising overnight. And of course, there is the third option, where pre-recorded ad can be placed into podcast episodes during pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll ad slots. Brands like Amazon have leveraged this approach, investing $22 million in the fourth quarter of 2024, focusing on traditional formats that integrate into episodes. Those were the most common podcast advertising methods, but the audio industry never stands still. So now let's explore the emerging trends shaping its future. AI was probably the #1 trend in the tech world during 2023 and will likely remain a dominant force in 2025 and beyond. And this hasn't skipped the podcasting industry. We've seen a surge in AI tools for podcasters to create easier workflows like editing, transcribing, or even full AI-powered podcasts. For example, there is AI-driven advanced speech-to-text transcription technology known as conversational targeting. It allows brands to go beyond what is currently possible in terms of targeting. Previously, ads were limited to genres or entire podcast series. With conversational targeting, advertisers can now target individual episodes and specific discussions, which may span a variety of categories. Let's examine food delivery services as an example here. They can target individual episodes of a podcast where the host discusses what they're having for dinner or their love of cooking, even if that happens to be a podcast from quite different genre. Video is another growing trend. While podcasting used to be 100% audio in early days, there are more and more podcasters who release their regular audio-based RSS feed but also on video platforms like YouTube. And according to statistics, YouTube is used more often to listen to podcasts than Spotify or Apple Podcasts. These days, most successful podcasts operate in hybrid formats, offering both audio and video versions. This evolution makes perfect sense. It lets audiences consume content on their preferred platform, whether they are commuting or watching at home. For advertisers, this dual format expands reach while maintaining the intimacy that makes podcast ads so effective. As you can see, guys, podcast ads are pure gold. But if you are still not convinced, here is the knockout stat for you. Podcast ads drive 49% of listeners to take an action, with 20% to make purchases. So, it is no longer possible to deny that the audio revolution is here. Whether you launch your own podcast or sponsor existing shows, one thing is clear. Podcast ads are a great solution when you want to reach people who are really listening. So, what are you waiting for?